Okay, so thank you for having me here. So here I'm going to present research where I develop a framework to compare two different policies aimed at fostering the use of alternative fuel cars. So this is the application of a more general, let's say, economic problem where we want to see how to foster the use of new technologies where there are some network externalities. In fact, I look at, when I say alternative fuel, in this paper I refer to compressed natural gas and liquefied petroleum gas, and I will give you more details about this technology later. But what is relevant here is that these vehicles run with these different fuels, and the retailer market is not developed yet. And I use Italian data because, as you got from Marco's presentation, Italy has very high heterogeneity that allow to identify the model I'm going to present, and the market share for this type of vehicles is high enough to have some numbers to estimate it. So, as I was suggesting before, the availability of the complementary goods, so of the fuel, is relevant in the choice of adopting these alternative fuel cars. Therefore, the research question I'm answering is how important is this fuel availability in adopting these cars, and which type of policy is more effective for the purpose of increasing the market share of these type of vehicles. So should we look at the demand side and incentivize with a price rebate the consumers, or we should look at the supply side and give subsidies for installing alternative fuel pumps? In order to do so, I build a model where I combine the demand of cars given the characteristics of these cars, so it's a function of the characteristics of this car, and among the characteristics I take into account there is also the availability of the fuel, and on the other side of the model is a model of entry, so filling station, and in particular it's a already existing traditional fuel filling station decided whether to add an alternative fuel pump. This paper would like to contribute to the literature on the adoption of fuel-efficient cars, but the focus here is exactly this link between demand and supply of fuels. So I refer to very established literature on demand estimation and entry. But let me give you a bunch of details on the technology and on the market I'm studying. So here we have these two types of vehicles are basically gasoline vehicle where they are installed this extra tank. So these two fuels are more are less pollutant than traditional fuel vehicles, in particular methane also in terms of local pollutants. But yeah, so what's interesting is that there is only like a kind of cheap technology that you add to an existing vehicle. So this is the reason why I will ignore the role of manufacturers, because actually who's developing these type of technologies are not the car manufacturers but other firms, and since early 2000 in Italy car manufacturers sells directly these type of vehicles, so we already installed this added technology. But yeah, the price of this extra technology is more compared to the price of cars, so it's around 5 to 10% of the price of car. Again, about the Italian market, could be interesting for you to know that the Italian car market is decreasing in terms of quantity of cars sold in the last 10-15 years, and but in 2000 2009, as in most countries in Europe, there were like huge subsidies for buying fuel-efficient car. So for traditional fuel cars, these subsidies were around like 1,500 euro for renovate cars, so it was scrappage schemes. When these scrappage schemes were applied to these alternative fuel cars, the subsidies was doubled. And as you can see, these subsidies seems not to have an effect on traditional fuel cars, while for these alternative fuel cars, there is a peak in the cars sold. But I will take into account the car market in 2012, so where a year in which there are no policies in act, and they will simulate the effect of a price rebate versus subsidies. So in order to estimate the model I will present you, I collected a bunch of data both on the car market, so in particular the car characteristics of the market, the car characteristics of the cars sold and their prices. Then I have prices on fuels, the filling station location, and some further information on the retailing market. So I'll give you just a bunch of details on the model, but there is no time to go really in depth on this. But the standard hypothesis is that consumers maximize their utility when they buy a vehicle. And so we have that the household H will choose the car J, which have a specific fuel in the market M. So we have a average utility, which is a linear function of the car characteristics and their prices, but it's also a function of the number of filling stations available in that market offering fuel F. On top of that, I also assume that the substitution pattern between traditional fuel, so within fuel, is different than from different fuels. So the idea is that consumers, first of all, choose which type of fuel they would like to run on, given the fact that there is a cost of learning about where the filling stations are, how this technology work, and so on. Then they decide the segment of the car, so whether they want a small car or a big car, and then finally choose exactly the jth model they would like to buy. And so at the end of the day, this is a standard nesting equation where we have the market share of the car that is a function of these characteristics and so on. So the other side of the market is modeled through an entry model. So the idea is that the filling station I in market M will get a margin from selling this alternative fuel car. And the fact is that these total liters of fuel sold is related to the number of cars circulating. So what I do is to starting from the idea that in the market there will be the number of filling stations that would maximize their profit, while an extra filling station would lead to a negative profit. I relate this number of liters of fuel sold with the estimated number of cars that would circulate given the number of filling stations, which is provided by the demand model. So these are the results of my demand estimation, where I want to underline the fact that actually this, so the logarithm of the density of this alternative fuel filling station is in fact positive, significant, and much bigger than the one for traditional fuel cars. So it means that in fact we take into account the availability of the fuel only if we want to buy this alternative fuel car. And this is the estimation for this fixed cost of adding this alternative fuel car. But let me go directly in the comparison of the counterfactual simulation that I built. And here the idea is that I want to compare a policy that is a price reduction for alternative fuel cars, but this would act only on the market share of the car, like the direct link is only through the market share of the car. And on the other side, I have a reduction of the fixed cost, which has a direct impact on the number of filling stations. So I have a static model, but given my definition of equilibrium, I can see the overall effect of this market share. So the idea is that I choose some realistic policies which imply a similar government expenditure, and I divide the counterfactual for the two fuels, so for LPG and for CNG. So in both cases, I would I would compare the policies where I have a price rebate for 1,700 euro versus a 60% reduction, so subsidies for reduction of fixed costs. And in the two cases, so the government expenditure is similar for the two-sided. And I not only see what's the direct effect, so of the first policy on the market share, but I also check what's the effect that the extra market share would have on firms in order to add an extra filling station. So the idea is that whether this extra market share would shift to the point in which it's profitable, so the number of firms that are profitable to enter in that market. While on the other side, again, I not only check what's the direct effect of this policy on the number of filling stations that enter, but I also check whether this extra filling station that would enter would push forward the market share. So this allow me to have some comparable result for this counterfactual. And so as you can see, actually the specific policies I'm taking into account have a much stronger effect. So the filling station subsidies have a much stronger effect both on pump densities and car purchase. And this result applies both for LPG policy and CNG policy. But something I would like to stress is that in both cases, this result does not come from, maybe here it's clear, so it does not come from a substitution from traditional fuel car to this alternative fuel car. So it's not the case that if I was buying a traditional fuel car, I would buy now an alternative fuel car, but it's more the case that if I was not buying that year a car, I would take into account to buy an alternative fuel car. So that's the reason why I say that the result of my model suggests that filling station subsidies have a stronger effect on both alternative fuel cars and station density, but the environmental effect is not clear because there would be more cars running. Obviously, my model does not take into account whether these cars are an extra car in the market or if there is a rebate. So obviously, there are still some caveats that would be very interesting to see, to model in addition to that. And as Marco was showing before about the heterogeneity of results, in Italy actually it applies here as well, but there is no time to also give you more details on this. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to you three for very interesting presentations. And now, if someone wants to comment or make a question, it could be the time. I think these three presentations were quite unique in the way they developed data and also on the focus on the determinants of the three issues. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I'm Valeria Di Cosmo from FIM. I have just a question for the first speaker. Maybe I missed something, but I don't know, how do you disentangle the effect of prosumers in your model? So we have in Italy, I think also in Spain, like a lot of people that maybe have a house in the countryside, they can install solar panel. So they are both demander and suppliers. So in your model, I saw that there are two different approach, like the demand and the supply are sort of divided. So how do you track these prosumers in your model, and how do you think they change if they change your results?
So, no, yeah, for the moment, I don't have a specific way to track this prosumer. The idea here is to develop the model also to consider also the consumer that actually are not really in the model, apart from the demand function. But yeah, I think that they can change the model, but still the decision of the producer whether to create the plant, whether to, I think will be still similar some way. What will change will be that some of the production will be for self-consumer consumption, but I think the idea of risk aversion is even stronger for this prosumer, and then I still think that the uncertainty can be even, the role of uncertainty can be even more important for them. So for sure it can be interesting also to consider this element. Thanks.
Okay, more questions? Yeah.
John Ramon Borrell, University of Barcelona. I have a question for Marco also. You're not considering the DSO investing in an alternative generation. For instance, let's assume that the DSO can invest also, and then the investment in smart improvements in the grid are only those that favor their investments in photovoltaic or aeolic generators. Do you think this is a cause of concern? So the DSO playing a game favoring its own generation plants?
Okay. Yeah, we don't consider still in the model this, but how I told during the presentation, this is the first development that we have in mind, because also in this document of the authority, they just say that the DSO is much more strong incentive for this traditional investment. And so, of course, if we would like to simulate this, we also would like to integrate the model to see if they are substitute this type of investment, if they can have some complements among them. I don't know about the second question, so if they want to favor their own station, I think it can be interesting, but I need to think about how to integrate this in the analysis. Maybe I need to think about. Thanks.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
A very quick question to the paper of trade gravity model. Don't you think that perhaps your no result in terms of energy prices, you can try to qualify a bit more, in the sense that, for instance, you can use electricity trade, as a way to overcome intermittency of renewables? So you have lots of trade in Scandinavian countries for this. So perhaps you can try to include some other variable of interest in your framework that is, I think, is very good to, have, results that are a bit.
Okay, so thank you very much for the suggestion. Yes, that was in the pipeline actually to introduce some kind of thing. The way that we interpret the non-significant result of prices are a statistical result. We are taking the average of 1 year, and then we are introducing country fix effects, which will take care of every, let's say, static characteristic. So we interpreted the result that in our time span, the price variation within countries was not that big. So that was, let's say, partially absorbed by the country fix effect. That's the interpretation that we have at the moment, but we are currently discussing that. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, so a question for Giulia. Could you just tell us a bit, so how disaggregate is your demand data? So what's your geographic market? That's number one. Yes. And a bit more also about the demand side, about the structure of the nests and what are the implications in terms of cross-product substitution.
Yeah,
so you didn't have the time in 15 minutes to go through it, so now maybe you can use it to tell us a bit more about the paper.
yes, thank you for the question. So the market is a local market area. So they are an aggregation of municipalities designed by the National Institute of Statistics. So we have like 600 markets. I guess I have a map here. And so this is like also gives you a bit the idea of the variation. And the idea is that they are built on commuting patterns, so wherever people work and live. And I thought that it was a good definition given the fact that actually we mostly use the car for daily usage. So in fact, the filling station would consider the people who live in the area where they commute. And the second question about what's the impact of nested logic on the result, basically. So what the idea of the substitution?
What the assumptions about the nests tell you about the cross-product substitution?
So obviously, so it plays a big role in the sense that for this for the outside good result, let's say. So in the counterfactual, I'm kind of putting some extra cost for the consumer who would buy this traditional fuel car to switch to the traditional fuel car. So part of the result on the counterfactual, where we see more like substitution from the outside good to the alternative fuel car, is driven by this. But the demand results where you see that this the coefficient for the, let's say, the coefficient for these nested coefficient are quite high, so it suggests that actually there is some constraint in the substitution between different models. Then I have also some, I also estimated a bit what happens in if we have different assumption in the model. But the general result that there is a stronger effect in the policy when we substitute the filling station compared to the price rebate is always there. That result is robust to this specification.
Okay, I think we are done by now. Actually, there are any more questions, so coffee break is waiting for us. I would like to thank the people in the table here and for their very good presentations. And I think this is the best session I've ever chaired. So thanks a lot for this. Okay.